Hi, everyone. Super happy to welcome you guys all back to another episode of the Teens for Business podcast. I'm your host, Jackie.
I'm Kylan.
I'm Jack.
And I'm Ivan.
So, this is part two of our, in continuation of our previous episode of F1 racing. And in today's episode, we'll be talking about a comparison between different sports leagues and how they make their money. So, feel free to share tidbits from any of your personal favorite professional sport leagues like NFL, NBA, things like that. So, as we talked about in part one, these leagues all have many different ways of earning money. So, for example, NFL, F1, like all of these like different leagues have media deal rights. So, what do you guys know about how they make their money? Because I'm sure like all of these leagues, they don't have the exact same ways. Like, there's unique ways for all of them.
And I think as we previously mentioned, F1, is an international sport, so that kind of like makes its media deals kind of different because I think each major country around the world has its main media company make a multi-million dollar agreement with F1 to have all the broadcasting rights because it's so international, so each broadcaster would have different ads. Like, an advertiser in the UK would not resonate with the American audience and vice versa. So if F1 has like multiple media rights deals with multiple companies like ESPN, Sky Sports to make sure they're like kind of having each group, international group, is making the most money possible from the sport. And I think the NFL and NBA will have kind of differences, which I think either Kaiwan or Jack will touch into.
Yeah, this is a perfect transition for me to talk a little bit more about the NFL. The NFL in America is the most popular league. It's by far the most watched in America because it relates to so many trends. Like what we talked about in the Thanksgiving episode, there's a NFL trend related to that dates back to more than 100 years ago. So definitely the NFL has like a big legacy in like shaping not only just the sport, but also just shaping the lives of like Americans in general. So right now, obviously, NFL has like several lucrative deals with several major broadcasting stations, such as like I think Fox and like NBC are two of the major ones. And then obviously also like NBA, they have several deals with a like I think HBO Max is like one of the companies that sponsors the NBA, and so many other like different like leagues are are very popular leagues have like several media rights sponsorship deals. And and I know that like although also like I think we should also touch upon soccer because that's also a pretty popular international sport. They have very popular media rights deals like the World Cup sponsored by several companies like Fox and like many other companies that stream like the World Cup final, because at the end of the day the World Cup final was watched by more than by like a large portion of like the people around the world, like live on TV and potentially on in person. So those media rights deals definitely are a big way that many popular sports leagues are making their money.
Yeah, definitely. Just touching back on the NFL, like what the deals they have with television networks. I remember last week the Chiefs Dolphins game. I think the NFL sold those rights exclusively to Peacock, so people were kind of going crazy over like they had to pay in order to watch it. So I think as a television network, you can buy like exclusive rights to a game. I'm sure it's going to be expensive, but yeah, there's also going to be like broadcasting partnerships, and then especially NBA. I know they sell it to like digital streaming as well. I know there's games on Prime. I know the NFL, the entire like Thursday Night Football was on Prime this year. So yeah, there's so many different ways that these sports just broadcast their games.
Yeah, I'd just like to add on to something I didn't talk about in my response before. Like obviously we talk a lot about F1 and soccer. Those are like there's like several leagues around those that are pretty international. And we talked about some American like leagues that are like more like professional at that like professional level. But something I want to talk about is like the college level, because those are getting like a lot of attention recently. Like the March Madness is super popular in like basketball, and we see the college football playoff has been also very super has been also super popular. Like I think several Colorado games were on primetime this year, even though they weren't like necessarily a good team, but they were popular because they had like the number one recruit from like a certain year. His name was Travis Hunter. He's a half wide receiver, half cornerback, and for someone like that, like a dual position on both the offense and defense in football, that is very rare. So that definitely attracted like a lot of attention. And I can see like college, even like college like football or college basketball is getting so much like more attention that even some leagues, even like I'm not sure if this is like completely accurate, but they are getting like a lot of attention and they had a recent like big deal. Um they signed like a 7 like billion deal like across like a few years, and obviously that shows like how like media rights are like shaping like different like even like college like conferences.
Yes, definitely. That's a really good point about like college football too. How there's like different levels and like that kind of all intertwines together. So okay, moving on. Budget caps. So just to talk about F1 since that was like the main topic of last time, this is a continuation. So historically, F1 did not have budget caps and like these weren't really implemented until like very, very recently. And of course, Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull, with their respective like top drivers, have always been the ones that have performed the best in history and therefore have had the largest budgets. And then there's something kind of in that itself of where like, okay, if you do well, you have more money to spend, and then but like more money to spend means that your cars are going to be better, like your resources are going to be better as well. So that was just kind of the cycle, and then the cap was implemented. However, as we've seen in the NFL, NBA, other things like that, there's something similar going on with the cap for all of these different leagues and like how much a team can actually spend regardless of how well they do and how much money they bring in. So interestingly enough, the MLB does not have a cap. And like there's different regulations on that. So like luxury tax, for example, but there's no like actual cap of how much money like they can spend as much money as they want to and as much as they have. So what are your thoughts on a salary cap, whether it's hard or soft, versus paying as much as you want for a player or for the team in a whole?
I think me personally, I would rather have a cap than not because the recent news. I think everyone heard it, like the MLB. I think it was the Dodgers. They signed Shohei Ohtani for like a ridiculous sum amount of money, and that kind of highlights if you don't have a cap for each of the teams, you're just gonna find the best players and pay them a ridiculous sum of money to make them come and play for the team. And that kind of is unfair because like the newer teams or the teams not in popular cities like the Dodgers in Los Angeles, one of the biggest teams in the country. Like if you're not in a popular part of the country, then you don't have the money, and like because you don't have money, you can't be competitive anymore. So I think that's like a big problem in a lot of the sporting leagues. But I think for the NBA, especially, like they have a very good system of like preventing that from happening. Like there's a continuous cycle of teams who are getting good, and then other teams will get better, etc. And I think the NBA has a really pretty good system. But I also want to mention F1 because like F1 is one of the sports that was notorious for having that was and is notorious for having good teams winning races. Like even after implementing a budget cap of like I think it was $250 million, these teams like Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes are still outperforming the rest of the grid. And the bottom of the grid like Haas, they have the same budget cap. They're spending like the same amount of money, but they just don't perform as well. And that's like even like I don't F1 apart from like spending a hard spending cap, they also have like the time to test your cars and also wind tunnel testing. So it depends on how good you do the season. Like the first team obviously gets the least amount of time to test their cars because they obviously can make a car. So like the bottom of the grid like Haas, they would have more time to spend on wind tunnel tests and like track testing, etc. in order to hopefully level up the playing field. But that's just not happening. I think simply because there's so many other different factors. Like these teams who are staying in sports for so long, they typically have general managers. They have better mechanics. They have a history of mechanics, so they know what they're doing. And they're like they have a good sense of company loyalty. There's not a lot of shuffling around, unlike other sports. But like for F1, there's a lot of loyalty for your company. Like even though your pay is kind of the same, but you're just loyal to your company. So like these larger teams, they just have better drivers, better mechanics, and better analysis. So like even though you're spending not a lot, a very significant amount of money over other teams in the bottom of the grid, you still are outperforming them. So like I think the typical, definitely have like a cap. It's definitely working for teams like in the NBA, NFL, but it's just not working for the F1. So I think there's something they should do to kind of like make the gap closer, and that's why a lot of the sports like F2, F3, they literally have the same chassis, they literally have the same engine, same car. But that's why the racing field is a little bit closer. But you can see also in those sports, the more bigger teams like the Red Bull feeder, they usually perform much better than the rest of the grid. So there's something else that F1 needs to do to level out the playing field.
Yeah, I definitely agree that like we can see like that caps are very much working in the NFL and NBA. There's like cycles where teams are really good for a long time, but then the cap plays in and they have to like pay their star players who are initially on rookie contracts, but then their star players get paid and now they go over the salary cap. And then after that, like I guess like dynasty ends, like which is kind of happening with the Golden State Warriors. Like they had like a big dynasty over the past like 10 or so 10 some around 10 years, but now they're still over the salary cap, but like they're obviously struggling. So I think it's like fair that this cycle is like happening, like the Oklahoma City Thunder, like now they just it's like a perfect example of that cycle showing because like they were over the cap like when Russell Westbrook and Paul George were on that team. Then they went into a period of mediocrity where they could rebuild, and now they're really good again with a lot of draft picks. So I think this like cap system is definitely working for these leagues. And I think some like I've been mentioned F1, but I'm gonna also mention the English Premier League here because that's obviously a really like rich league that technically doesn't have like a budget cap, but FIFA has something that's called financial fair play, and obviously teams have to abide to that. So it is kind of a cap, but also like it's pretty lenient. And based on that, we've seen big teams receiving like big like investments. Like Newcastle recently received an investment from like company. Wait, I don't know if this is like companies, but like a big part of like this like Saudi Arabia. Like I think it's like I think it's actually part of the government that actually took part in this like investing. But either way, now Newcastle's a really powerful team in terms of like financial spending. They just need to be like very careful that they don't cross like financial fair play, which isn't really hard to do. And like as as we can see, like in like soccer, we always see those like big teams having big success, like Real Madrid. They always get the star players. Manchester United, Liverpool, they always get those star players. Like, why can't we give like Everton or like Brighton the chance to like get to the top or get the Champions League? Like, I think I think a salary cap would could potentially like work in soccer, but also it's really hard because soccer is obviously a very like international sport. There's several competitions that go over several countries, and like the the I guess like economic conditions like are very different for each country. So I think a salary cap would make it more fair for soccer, but also it's really hard to implement given all these like different conditions.
Yeah, I agree. I think that like just going back to like the NBA and like NFL, I guess those sports do have caps, and I think I think the fact like that teams do need to stay under that cap is probably a good idea just because like Jack mentioned, with different teams being dominant at certain times, I just think that it is normal for there to be a cycle and for teams to not necessarily just be able to spend however they want because owners have money. I don't think that that plays in well with like the dynamic of the sport. I know like especially for the MLB, like the A's, the owner like is super cheap, right? And but you have the Dodgers who just got Shohei. They're willing to spend a lot of money, and that's why the A's like they haven't been good in a while. So I do think that the cap most of the time is a pretty good idea for the NBA and the NFL. I don't really follow that many other sports, so I can't really talk about that too much. But from what I've seen, I do agree with the cap.
Yeah, and I think like I want to mention like, I think too the cap should be strictly enforced because I was thinking like with Jack, like the FIFA is not really strict on the financial whatever it is. It's like that's why you see like a lot of teams running away with like, a lot of the big teams with a lot of money. They're running away with all the star players, and I think it's same applies to like the F1. Like even though the Red Bull and like the large teams they go over the spending cap, you just get like a slap on the wrist, and everything is all fine again. And a lot of these small teams they don't have enough money and they don't spend nearly enough. And but the larger teams they can get away with spending a lot more than a budget cap. And the F1 just goes like, oh, we can't do that, and then gives them a slap on the wrist, and then everything's fine again. So I think these leagues, in order to make sure the playing field is level, they gotta strictly enforce it. Like they have to have a punishment in order to prevent teams from going over the cap.
Yes, I definitely agree. And that kind of leads me to my next question about salary caps. So we kind of talked about salary caps, but it was just more of should it exist or should it not exist? And there's different types of salary caps. So the NFL, for example, operates under a hard cap, meaning that they just can't exceed the limit. Um, for example, the 2023 season was $224.8 million. And of course, there's like different ways of like how each front office structures their deals to make sure they don't go over that. And there's different strategies, but that's kind of like you just can't go over it. And then the NHL is also pretty similar, just instead of $224 million, it's like 83 million. And then the NBA has a soft cap, meaning that there is a limit, but then there's also like the luxury tax system that's like if you go over the limit. But that just kind of goes to show like there's different like types of caps even within, like even if you have a cap. So what do you guys feel about like soft versus hard caps? And like what do you think is more fair? What do you think should happen? What do you think is the best to watch for?
Yeah, I definitely think I prefer a hard cap over sort of soft cap because like I think a soft cap. I know these star players they should get paid a lot of money because the impact they're making on the sport. Like the first thing that comes to mind is definitely like the NBA because like the NBA has a ton of star players that teams are willing to spend a ridiculous sum of money to make them play for their team. And the NBA is actually like I think one of the more competitive sports out there because simply they play so many games and there's like so many teams that it's pretty competitive. Like the worst, well, I don't think it's the same for this year, but like the worst team usually is not that much worse than the top team. Like you can see a lot of upsets going on within the NBA. And so I think for those kind of environments, a hard cap wouldn't really do well, but a soft cap like the NBA currently has will actually do because like there's so many star players and but the competition is still very fierce even if you have all the star players on the team. Like the role players make a very big impact also on the team. So I think a soft cap would be perfect there, but I think a hard cap applies to every other sport because the NFL they're not that competitive as compared to the NBA, and the top players are earning a ridiculous sum of money, and that doesn't leave any money for the rest of the team. And these NFL teams are actually huge, right, compared to NBA teams. So I think a hard cap will actually prevent these teams from just loading up the star players with money and then just kind of leaving everyone in the dust. And I think that's kind of working. I'm not too sure. I think someone else can be a better judge of that. And as I said, F1 I don't think actually applies because the drivers themselves already come from very wealthy backgrounds. So they can just take a couple $1 million less. They don't really care. They're already financially well off. They just want to win. So I think something else needs to be different in the F1 here.
Yeah, I definitely agree with like I prefer hard cap over soft cap, and I think maybe a perfect example of this would be like the NFL. Like if it weren't if there was no cap at all, let's like imagine if NFL had no cap at all, then those like companies, I mean the teams with like big sponsorships that they're from big cities, they'll potentially get more revenue simply because of like outside conditions. Like they live in that city, they're gonna be more popular, or they have like a lot of legacy. They're gonna get like a lot. They're gonna be attracted by like companies to like sponsor them. So those are like why like if we didn't have a hard cap on the NFL, then teams would build a dynasty, like which is like what is happening with some soccer teams already. But like with a cap, we can definitely see that there's like a cycle that every team could eventually have like a fair chance of like winning a championship. We can see like the margin between the teams aren't as really like aren't as like big, and just makes it like fair that every team has their strength, every team has their weakness, and that's obviously more fair. But obviously, if the MLB would have like a cap right now, obviously the Dodgers would be over it, but they wouldn't be over by that much because Shohei Ohtani decided to defer his contract over several years, like after his contract period. So there's obviously those like sort of like loopholes that could happen with like caps. And in that case, I feel like and like for like the NFL, like there's like something called like bonuses, which like are like separate. They don't I don't know. Wait, no, they contribute to their salary cap, but this like different from like their base salary. So like the NFL is like something like that, and that definitely is like working through the like the cap just to ensure that the system is like working so that each team could have like a fair chance. And as of like the NBA, since there are like so many stars, there are like 32 teams. And there's more than 32 like superstar caliber players. And for that case, I think that for each team would have like would naturally should have like I guess like the star player, but due to like the nature of the soft cap, sometimes that doesn't completely happen. But I think it would work better than the hard caps just due to simply the size of NBA teams, because NBA teams are simply a lot smaller than other teams that have like that run on hard cap. Like NHL and NBA teams are like a lot smaller. They're only like five on the core, five on the rink at like one time. So I definitely think like potentially like a soft cap could work better where there's like less players that are actually like playing and are contracted to the team rather than like teams with like more amount of players like NFL. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that just looking into like the NBA, the soft cap, it's interesting because I think most teams generally choose to stay under even though they can go over, but like the amount that you ha do have to pay if you do go over is kind of crazy. So I think that it's just generally like unless you're probably competing for a championship in which you might choose to spend a little bit more than the normal. I do think teams naturally do go under. So I kind of like the idea of the soft cap. Should like the NFL is dealing with a hard cap, and I think they're doing pretty well, but I do like the idea that if you are like competing for a championship, you can pour a little bit more money in and then, to try to like boost your chances. I think the NBA system is pretty good.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, like that last point. I feel like it would be really interesting to see. Also, like if you just imagine having like a soft cap for like let's say the NFL, like that's not like it's not sustainable for like a really long period of time. Like you're right, like you're not gonna have like 10 years where you have like every single superstar player on your team. It's usually just for like a relatively short period, like a few seasons, like one maybe. And so I definitely think that like that'd be interesting to see like if a team's really, really like trying to go at it for the Super Bowl one year, like seeing what they can like really put together and like imagine like just like the Pro Bowl, but like people actually care about it kind of thing. I feel like that would be actually really interesting to watch. Okay, and then last question for like a little bit of a curveball. What league do you think star players can make the most money in? So like take like the star players out of every single league. Like what do you think would be the most fun? What do you think would be the most financially smart one to play for? What do you think would get you the most advertising gigs?
I would say the NBA because NFL. I think the NFL contracts are crazy. The star players definitely do earn us a lot of money, but I think it also comes with a huge risk because I think any position on the field has a relatively higher chance of getting injured than in the NBA. And because like I think other than a quarterback, you're basically getting shoved into the ground every single play. And that for me, I think if you're a star player committed to playing a lot of years into the sport, I don't think the NFL is the way to go unless you're a quarterback and you're like someone like Tom Brady, which teams are still willing to pay millions of dollars for even if he comes back to the league. And I think the one of the reasons the NBA, like I know relatively less injuries. I know a lot of people like they do have things like jumper's knee, so like something that is not physically involved, like not concussions. I think what is it called, CTEs? Like NFL, like the retired players, they typically have brain damage, so I don't think that's a very smart move there. So like NBA is definitely a lot safer, and I think they have like generally like more options too. Like NFL, you only have these couple of teams, but in the NBA, you're like, oh, this team. If you're a good player, like you have options. You're like this team they don't treat me well, and they're not good, and they don't pay me enough money, and I just leave. And there's definitely like 10 other teams who want to pick me up. Like that's just a safer option, a better option, and I think NBA is more popular too than the NFL with the younger generation. So if you do want to play the sport for a longer year and get more sponsorship deals, like the NBA is definitely where to go. Look at how many basketball players other than the large players who have their own shoes. Like that's crazy. And like John Morant has his own shoes. Like even though he's like such a relatively young player, he already has his deals with Nike to make his own shoes. Like I think the NBA is definitely the best league in the entire world. Or other, I don't know about soccer. I don't really have thought about it. Maybe in the US, definitely NBA is definitely like the smartest move for any star player.
Yeah, just going off of Ivan's last point, well, he said that NBA is definitely the best league for like someone to like make a lot of money in the US. I was gonna talk about soccer, which is definitely one of the better ways to make money like in internationally. Like soccer is like a huge popular sport. Like not only do they have like multi-million dollar contracts with the team, they also have like sponsorship contracts, like many stars like Messi and Ronaldo, they have shoe deals with Nike, Adidas, and other like big companies. And also we've seen like a lot of players moving to Saudi Arabia because Saudi Arabia is willing to offer a lot of money. They're a very rich country and they're willing to offer them a lot of money. And they've actually attracted a lot of players to go to that league. Like even Ronaldo has been in Saudi Arabia to pretty much almost like conclude like his career. So we just see like, and I think his I think there was an offer for Mbappe, who's a really young player, to move to Saudi Arabia. That like there was like a trend that he was making thousands like per or like several dollars like per minute or per second that he was like in Saudi Arabia. I think the contract that he was offered was a 2-year contract that was worth like 700 million, which is like super like big. And just that's just a contract itself. Like there's like other sponsorship deals that are not included in that contract. So you could definitely see like obviously there are Saudi Arabia's soccer league is obviously a growing league. There's obviously been a lot of complaints like recently, like big star player Jordan Henderson, who moved from Liverpool just in the past summer, has already moved to Ajax because there's a lot of things about like Saudi Arabia that he like doesn't agree with, such as like the worker conditions in Saudi Arabia and how Saudi Arabia is handling the LGBTQ situation. So obviously there's like a lot of consideration that comes with moving to Saudi Arabia, but also just like staying in Europe as a whole is just lucrative in itself. And for anyone who's like who wants to like be and like soccer is like recognized internationally, so that's like a bigger like that's like a bigger like customer base and like bigger attraction for like people than just like a league than just in the US. So I think that soccer could be playing like soccer in like one of Europe's like I think more specifically in the Premier League because they're the most popular league in the world for soccer. I think that could be a very smart play for a star player.
Yeah, I guess other than soccer, going back to Ivan's point about the NBA, I just think that it's definitely the NBA in America because the contract sizes are crazy. Like they're even bigger than the NFL. Like Jalen Brown, he's not really a superstar. He's a decent player. I think he just signed the largest deal in NBA history. He got over $300 million, and that's unheard of in the NFL, even like unless you're like a top quarterback, which even then you're making like between 50 and 60 a year. And then like wide receivers, you're probably like around 30. So for like an average, okay, above average, like around top 20 NBA player to be making like $300 million over 6 years, that's an insane amount of money. And yeah, NFL is like a much more dangerous sport than the NBA. Like running backs, the most like I guess the dangerous position, they make like under $10 million a year. So I do think if there was a sport, if there was a league that pays the best, it's definitely the NBA. I think it has a lot to do with like the NFL having so many players on the team that you can't really afford to give one player like too much money because you have like over 50 players, whereas on an NBA team you only have like 15. And it's just like more of the NBA money is near the top than the NFL. So yeah, I do agree like the NBA is definitely the way to go if you want to make money in America.
Interesting. Okay, so thank you guys all so much for tuning in to this part two of a comparison between different sports leagues and their businesses. So I'm your host, Jackie, and we'll see you guys all in our next episode.